Good evening, viewers, and welcome once again to Talk Back with Gillian. This is your Sunday evening program where we take a look at the trending political issues in our country over the past week. I am your host, Gillian Burton Persaud, and I'll be with you up until 8 hours this evening. Well, what's in the news for the last week? We had the termination of staff by the new public service minister. We'll be looking at that this evening. And the Prime Minister Nagamutu and the GNNL fiasco. David Hanks called on the government to flush out PPP molds at state agencies. GPL and the continuing power outages that we're having. And a shelter for abused women that is going to be constructed in Linden. Those are some of the issues we'll be looking at this evening. But as usual, we commence our program with a quote for today. And our quote is, "Do what is right, not what is easy. Do what is right, not what is easy." And it's important, that we do the right things. Don't look for the shortcut and the things that we will figure that is the easy way out. They say the shortcut is often the wrong cut. Well, as we get into the information that we will be looking at this evening, just 3 weeks ago, we had a new minister appointed for Minister of Public Service, and that was Minister Tabitha Saribuhali. And she took up the responsibilities of the Minister of Public Service, taking over from Mr. Rupert Roopnaraine, Dr. Rupert Roopnaraine, who was one of the persons who resigned from their positions because of dual citizenship and not wanting to give up one of those citizenship. So we had new minister appointed, and just 3 weeks within her appointment, we information that coming out from that agency said that the minister went in last week and she terminated the services of the entire personnel department along with the accountant of the ministry. She even went so far as to have the locks changed. She sent the driver to the accounts department to collect monies and had all the locks changed, and she was solely in possession of the keys for the entire ministry. Now, when the news came out, we see in the state media, they refuted the fact that it was not true. It was misinformation. But then the minister, when contacted, said that the reason why the entire staff, the old staff, was removed is because the ministry was moving in a different direction and no longer required the services of the old staff. But the question that we need to ask, if the ministry is moving in a different direction, then why an entire department was sent home? And an important department is the personnel department, and then the accountant was sent off. No other department, nobody else was sent off. Just this particular department, the entire department was sent off. But one of the things we need to look at, does the minister have that authority to terminate the services of staff? The minister is the political head of the ministry. It is the permanent secretary who is the administrative head of the ministry. And that authority lies with the permanent secretary. But we're seeing here a minister, and it's not a minister that was on the job, let us say, for the past year, 2 years, or what. This is a minister who just took up the portfolio 3 weeks ago and just decided, the ministry is going in a different direction, and so we're going to move the staff, and we don't have need for the old staff. You always have need for old staff because they would be the ones who will help to guide you as to what you're doing. Because they're there and they know the policies, they know the policy decisions, they know the things that, how they operate, the procedures. You're just there. You don't know everything. And then when we look at one of the questions is that, did this minister have a staff meeting after taking over to say to the staff, look, we're going to move in a different direction and some of you might have to be transferred or replaced or whatever? I don't think that happened. But you just got this feeling one day and you went into the ministry, sent people off, not knowing where they're going. Maybe 1 month's pay in lieu of notice. How long will that last? You put people on the breadline without any real proper justification. But also, it is just one particular department. So what is wrong in the personnel department, the human services department, the human resources department? What is so wrong in that department that you need the entire department to be changed, the staffing to be changed? Then what we got is that it was also out there in the public domain that it had to do with the information as it related to monies that were allegedly given in the name of the Minister Broom's children's name. And it is felt that the information came out from the ministry, and as such, persons did give out that information, and because of that, you had this entire termination coming so quickly by the minister. But you know, it is sad when we have to wonder, and this is something that has been happening since the coalition government took office in 2015. Persons are being sent on the breadline. Once it's felt that they're giving information out there, and especially it's getting into the hands of the opposition, and if they're associated with the opposition, and there is this thing that once you have any association to do with the opposition, get you out of the place, go home. We don't need anything to do with you, whether it's true or false. And that has been happening, and that is why the opposition, we continue to say that it's witch hunting that is going on. But then we had the whistleblowers bill that came out last year, coming down to here, and in Parliament, it was passed in Parliament. And it had to do with protection of persons who were willing to come forward and give information. It has to do with transparency and accountability. And that was part of the debate when that bill was being debated before it was passed. The government side, they pressed on, we need this to happen, the whistleblowers, so people can give information, and they can be protected, right? But it's funny when it comes to the other side. When the shoe is on the other foot, is something different. So information is coming out. People are giving information and, not worried about what is taking place, worried about what is going on in the country, the high level of corruption that we're seeing taking place. The information comes out, but because that information is against the government, they have to leave. Terminate their services, part ways with you. We do not want any further business with you. And the fact about it that the minister would send for monies and purchase new locks, have them replaced, but not handing them over to the relevant persons. Why is that? The minister alone has the keys to the entire building. That information came out. If that is so, that is totally wrong. That should not be. And once again, when you're going to terminate the services of persons in that way, there is a department, and we keep saying, and I keep saying as a person who worked within the trade union movement, that you have to protect the rights of workers. And the fact that this coalition government took a ministry and scaled it downscaled it to the level of a department, an important ministry like the Ministry of Labor. Since then, we're seeing all kinds of, not right things happening as it relates to labor. Labor is taking a beating. And one would have felt, and I do hope, and if that was the case, then the minister was given wrong guidance, to contact the Department of Labor, which comes under the Ministry of Social Protection, to find out if this could be done, if this was the right way. Some persons will want to say, oh, what, she's the minister, and, you can do what you feel, it's your ministry. But each ministry has its policy framework cut out for it. It has its objectives, and aims, what it is supposed to do. So if one ministry is going to have to encounter some kind of issue, whatever it is, there is a ministry that is there to guide them in the right direction. If it's finance, it's the finance ministry. If it has to do with auditing, you have the Auditor General's department. If it has to do with labor, you have the labor department, social protection. You can go to your counterparts, your colleagues, and get the directives. But just don't jump out on a limb and do something, and then when it's touted as wrong, it's like, okay, it's good by me. I can do what I please. We're having a lot of problems that way, and I would really hope that ministers will contact their colleague ministry to find out what are the policies and what are the right directives to go by, because they are there to guide you. So that is what we had. The new minister, within 3 weeks of taking up her portfolio as Minister of Public Service, we see that minister firing an entire department under the notion that they're going in a new directive and they do not have a place for the older staff. So I will want to feel you have older staff in other departments. Are you going to change those entire departments and bring new people, entire new staff there? Let's see what's going to happen. Then also we have where Prime Minister Nagamutu found himself in another fix. This time is with some members of the Guyana National Newspapers Limited Board, and it's including that the chairperson, Ms. Edmonds, and two other board members, Mr. Mervyn Williams and another board of director persons, and it relates to the reinstatement of the terminated Mr. Sherrod Duncan, who was terminated as general manager. And it is for the fact where the termination it was alleged that he used unauthorized money. It's alleged that he unauthorized did some spending to the tune of some $5 million in less than 3 months of his appointment. And we remember after Mr. Sherrod Duncan was one time the former deputy mayor of Georgetown. He had some fiascos there. And then he was placed, after he came off, he was sent to be the general manager of GNNL. And then after an audit was done, it was discovered that there was some unauthorized spending of $5 million used to purchase furnitures and that kind of stuff. And so the board took a position. They had a split vote, and the chairman cast the deciding vote, it is said, of having to terminate his service. Well, some months after that has happened, the Prime Minister has now, last week, reinstated the general manager in the position, and it was not taken nice by the chairperson and two other board members. And they have resigned from the board. Their resignations, we're told in the media, was accepted by the Prime Minister. And so Mr. Sherrod Duncan is back at the desk as general manager, and also some staff has threatened, indicated that they too will resign once Mr. Duncan is reinstated. Now, just before that, at GNL, there was the case where I think it's the finance person was sent off by Mr. Duncan, because it was felt that that person was the one who gave out that information as it relates to the unauthorized spending of the money. And soon after that happened, the Prime Minister again reinstated the person back to the position. So we find where at GNNL, wherever there are issues, when the persons are sent off, the Prime Minister uses his authority to reinstate those persons. And, we ask ourselves the question once again, what is really going on? We talk about accountability and transparency and not being corrupt and not interfering and meddling. And we talk about nepotism and friendism, but we see a lot of it happening on the very side of the very coalition government who on the campaign trail blamed the PPP administration for being guilty of such acts. Today, we're seeing it happening. Now, if the board took a decision to send off the general manager, months after, the Prime Minister has now decided that, it's good for him to go back because the process wasn't done correctly and there was no vote. And you have the chairperson talking about the minutes, that is correct and it's there, and issued him with the minutes to show that this was done. But then also out there in the public, there is the whispering that the reinstatement of Mr. Duncan could very well have to do with the Moses Nagamutu, Kemraj Ramjatan challenge for prime ministerial candidate of the coalition government. We know that the AFC party in the coalition is the section that fields the prime ministerial candidate. And it was felt that after the APNU side had re-endorsed Mr. David Granger to be the presidential candidate, that the AFC should also re-endorse Moses Nagamutu so that the two can go in hand. At least that's what's coming from the Prime Minister. But then we see his colleague, Minister of Public Security, Kemraj Ramjatan, who is saying that, that he is going to challenge his colleague for that position. And there has been, I think it was week before the last, you had a bit of obsession at one of their meetings that they had of their executive and who wants this name to be on a list and who should not be. But out there in the domain, there's a speculation that Mr. Sherrod Duncan, who's a heavyweight, the chairman of Region 4 for the AFC, is a heavyweight and he has a lot of influence on persons. And so it is seemingly that he's in the camp of Mr. Moses Nagamutu, the Prime Minister, and championing the cause for him to be re-endorsed as the prime ministerial candidate for the coalition. And so the battle goes on. So it is felt that his reinstatement has to do with that, getting him back there on the job and, favor for favor. So, we have to be very careful when we're pointing our fingers at persons, and saying that, you're guilty of that. And then when you get into that very position, you do the similar things, So the same nepotism and friendism, it's happening in the coalition government. So let's see what's going to come out of that. The chairperson and two of the members of the board have already submitted their resignations, and also there is staff who have indicated if they will also leave. So let's see. We have to keep our eyes on that issue. Then we have executive member of the WPA, Working People's Alliance, Mr. David Hines, who has now called on the government to flush out the PPP moles that are currently buried in the various government agencies. Well, we know Mr. David Hines is one of those persons who are very vocal, politically vocal on issues. He has now made this statement that the government needs to flush out the moles of the PPP moles that are buried in the agency. So what we want to believe is that he's subscribing to witch hunting, because it tells you that even if the person has not done anything, once they are associated with the PPP, or it's felt that they're associated with the PPP, then they should be removed. Their services should be terminated. And we would want to know if that was the engineering factor behind the actions of the Minister of Public Service, because the Minister of Public Service is also the chairperson of the WPA. And you're now seeing in the social media, don't know how true it is, that she's supposed to be the daughter of Mr. David Hines. So if it's so true or not, but that's what's out there in the public domain. But coming from the very political party and being the chairperson and now the new Minister of Public Service, one will want to wonder if those comments that was made by Mr. David Hines last week, if it had anything to do with the putting into effect the actions of the Minister of Public Service, terminating the services. And as I said earlier, it is felt that because information came out concerning transactions relating to Minister Brooms and, you know, the children's name being called, and it's so unfortunate. But has anything to do with that? Because Mr. David Hines is talking about moles being planted. Now, under the PPP administration, there were persons who worked in government agencies who were not PPP. They were strong, open and known PNC members, APNU members. The PPP government didn't terminate their services. They continued to work. And as the campaign heightened, you know, they were more and more open as to their affiliation with the then opposition. So why is it the PPP didn't take them out of work? They didn't throw them out there on the breadline. Why is it now, when we're talking about social cohesion, we're talking about harmony, we have Harmony Week, and we're talking about unity, and we're talking about cooperation and togetherness to develop this country, you're now having persons who are supposed to be responsible political leaders in this country coming out with comments like this, that you need to flush out moles. It means you're sending people on the bread line. And then you have a bill that was just passed to protect persons who give information as it would relate to corruption. But now you're saying that even though you pass this bill, if they give information that concerns you or points in your direction, then they must go. The information must only go back to the PPP. That is not what I understood the bill to be. It has to be about anybody. So, you know, sad if you're caught in the tangle. You know, they said, oh, what a tangle web we weave. So I feel, you know, it's very irresponsible, and it's very disheartening to hear that type of comment coming from somebody as Mr. David Hines, who's supposed to be a responsible political leader in this country. And the comment also seemingly has to do with the duty-free concession that was granted to the Minister of Finance and the bank account information of the Minister of Public Infrastructure. So, you know, 3 instances where it's felt that information was given out that should not have been. And, you know, so there is a call from a political quarter to have the PPP moles flushed out. Sad to say, should that become a policy or an activity, there are going to be some innocent persons who will be caught in the web, because, you know, it's once it's alleged or it's seemingly so that you're sympathetic or supportive of the PPP, you know, you're branded. Then we have the continued blackouts that is happening across the country. And last week also we noted in the media where the new chairman of the board of GPL, Mr. Lucas, is saying that their blackouts will continue for a period of time, a prolonged period. It's not a 2 or 3 week something. And it has to do with the fact that one of the submarine cable has been cut in the Atlantic, and it said that it was cut by one of the ocean-going vessels. Those big vessels, they got tangled into that and it damaged the cable. But not coming down to the end of the week, it was stated in social media that it was not one of those foreign vessels that damaged the cable, but in fact that there was some excavation work being done around the area where the cable was, and it was the contractor, who is a supporter and a financer of the coalition government, got that contract, and it was their equipment that damaged the cable. So it's being seen as if it's some sort of cover-up. So you blame an international vessel, but really it's one of your local contractors who has been doing work in the area that damaged the cable. And we know what happens. People who are working on these projects, they come out and they say what happens. So you're going to terminate the entire staff of the contractor now because maybe they brought out that information. But the blackouts have, it's increasing, it's happening every day, it's disrupting work at homes, work at businesses. Persons depend on availability of power so that we can have work done. And people are losing revenue because all like the salons and the barber shops and all those various businesses that have to deal with a lot of electricity, they're suffering. And because of that, their work can't go on, and so they're losing money because many of them have targets and timelines to meet and they can't meet it. And we have in Guyana a lot of electronic equipment that is being used across our country. A lot of equipment is being used where persons use equipment, computers, laptops and these kinds of things. And they're being affected by it. Your cell phones, you have to charge it so often, wherever you can get some power to charge up your cell phone. Because that's the thing in Guyana, one of the many ways of modern communications across Guyana today. And so when these blackouts happen and for long periods, your phones run down and you can't get to use your equipment. So your communication process is being hampered. But we're also seeing once again where the government is placing the blame of the damaged submarine cable at the foot of the PPP. Everything once it's gone wrong or bad in this country, it's the PPP that is doing it. When they were in government, they did something so wrong that when this government take over, they could not have rectified it. So the blame game of casting blame on the opposition. Then we had, I noted in the media also last week, where there was a turning of the sod to commence the construction of 2 shelters for abused women in 2 areas in Linden, Amelia's Ward and Blueberry Hill in Linden, along with 2 community centers. Great, nothing wrong with that, because we know we're doing a lot of talking about abuse, women being abused. We're talking about domestic violence, and abuse of children. And when these instances happen and the women have to be moved away from the home, there is no way really to take them. But at the same time, we're putting 2 shelters in one region. And let us say in the very same environment area, you have Amelia's Ward and you have Blueberry Hill a little further up over at Wisma. But what happened to the other regions? That is my concern. What has happened to the other regions? And this project, it's a project that is in collaboration with the New Horizon organization of the United States. Now, in my mind, I'm wondering, what was the criteria used in selecting the region, Because we're in need of much more facilities like that. We have a high domestic violence rate in victims coming out of in Region 6. We have in Region 2. We have in Region 3. We even have here in Region 4. We need shelters across Guyana. I do hope that in the very, 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 very near future, we can see the turning of the sod in other regions so that those persons affected can be taken there. Or is it that you're moving them from the regions and placing them in that region? Then we need to know, because we just hear about the turning of the sod, we don't have a clue what's really going on. Will these houses, these shelters, house the women and their children or their dependents with them? Because you can't remove the woman and leave the children. And sometimes that woman have an elderly relative with her, somebody who's connected with her. So I do hope that this is just not a turning of the sod and a building and just to say, oh, we have shelters, we're dealing with domestic violence. Domestic violence is much bigger than that. Because we also have to make sure that we can train these women if they're not working to stand up on their own. If they're working in a particular environment where it might not be safe, where the perpetrator will try to get at them, then we have to be able to find somewhere where they can continue to earn. And then we have to be able to get them on their feet to be able to take care of their families. And we have them with a different mindset. Because, you know, domestic violence is not only physical, it's mental, it's psychological. There's so many different types of domestic violence. But as I said, you know, good, we're starting there. The shelters are needed. We need to have them. But I do hope that it's not going to be 2 shelters just in this region, and then the other regions are left without. And, you know, don't let us hear that, oh, well, the monies are, you know, we have to look for the monies. Because just 2 weeks ago, when we had our Independence Carnival, it is stated that the very government spent $4 billion to purchase tickets to share out for the Buju Banton concert. And that money could have been used to build some more shelters in other regions. So, you know, we have to get our priorities right. And we need to be able to do things in the right and proper perspective. We also need to understand that we mustn't do things for as a political gimmick. You know, when you do certain things and it happens, and we're noticing a lot of haphazard things are happening. We're noticing now and only now, after about 3 years, the president has gone to, I think it's Albion, to talk with the sugar workers who were laid off there and those who are on the job and tell them they have nothing to worry about. They're going to look out for them. After 3 years, now the president could see it fit to go and talk to those sugar workers. That is very, very bad. Very disrespectful to those persons. They have been sent on the breadline, their lives have been disrupted, and those who are there are still wondering what is going to happen because you're hearing talks about the selling out of Gaisuko to a foreign entity and all of that. But, as we continue to say, after December 21st, and the passing of the no confidence motion, we've seen this coalition government who has neglected this country and the citizens of this country going helter-skelter around Guyana trying to appease persons. So it's like you're trying to say, oh, your hand in tiger mouth, so you're going to pat its head. And I think with the fact of what happened at the local government elections, the way in which people did not turn out to vote, and the way in which even persons decided to vote for the PPP, you know, apparently there is now this new awakening that we need to go out there and meet the people, but especially after the passing of the no confidence motion on December 21st. And now as we await to hear the decision of the CCJ, and everybody in Guyana is anxiously awaiting. We are hearing about the Attorney General applying to be able to submit new evidence, new information to the CCJ as it relates to the appeal that was sent by the opposition in relation to the no confidence motion, the appeal on the decision of the Court of Appeal here in Guyana. And while we await that decision, the government is going all over the place, doing a lot of things. Once again, it's fair, it's a lot of promises. It's a lot of promises, and those promises are being seen as political gimmicks that is happening in our country. We cannot treat our citizens like that. Our citizens need to be treated with dignity and respect, and their interest needs to look after. They were promised a good life, and they're awaiting that good life. So let's hope that all this going around is not to fool the people again. And once they vote for you and they put you back there, and then you go back to the same old same. There's a saying that once a dog accustomed to sucking egg, they can't change. And, sometimes the actions of this coalition government makes us wonder what is really their motives. How do they see the people of Guyana? In what stead do they see them? Well, we have some calls coming in. I'm going to open up the phone lines here. And our numbers here are 233-2459, 233-2459. You can get us here on Talk Back with Gillian. So the phone lines are open and we're awaiting your calls. Good evening and welcome to Talk Back with Gillian. So we need to hear from you. Let's hear what are your perspectives on what's happening in our country, especially on the issues that we spoke about earlier. Good evening and welcome to Talk Back with Gillian.
Hello, good night.
Good night.
I just want to give I want to know if the president is listening to this program then. Because let's just give you a little thing back. Now, if I is a contract, you give me a house a bill, and I is the contractor, and I check on people to bill it, and then goes wrong with it, who's going to get it first?
Well, that is what, because if you're talking about a contract between a contractor and the government.
No, I'm talking, say me get a contract from you.
Mm-hmm.
And I take on people to work, and anything go wrong, and who are you going to give?
You're going to blame you.
The contractor.
Exactly.
So, I want to know if the president is listening to that program, this because all the blame going on him. For the minister, them, all the blame going on the president. Why he don't do something?
Well, you see, what we see happening is that when these allegations are leveled against the ministers of the government, next thing we see, they have a sweeping change. They just switch them from one ministry to the next. That's what's happening.
Yeah, but he is putting bad name on himself. He is putting bad name.
But maybe he don't think so.
And the next thing I want to know, what PPP do 23 years? PPP put back this country on its foot. And people calling in and say, what people PPP do for 23 years? If, I don't know if people are seeing or I don't know what happened with their brains.
Well, those are some persons, who will not, despite whatever, they're seeing the development that took place in front of them, but they do not want to be realistic,
Because I know at time in PNC, you have to stand up on the road 2-3 hours to get a vehicle, and if you don't get one, you have to go back.
Mm-hmm.
If we come and make everybody can own something in their life today. And I don't know why people talking bad about PPP. Okay, them want to mistake in government. Everybody have mistake in their life. But I want to know why they bad talking PPP like that. I don't.
Well, they talk about PPP giving misinformation, but that is part of their misinformation propaganda campaign.
Okay, thank you and good night. And I want the president to listen to this program and hear how we name going down in this rain.
Okay, thank you for coming through, caller. And indeed, the person who's the head, they say uneasy is the head that wears the crown. It is the head who will get the blame at the end of the day, Good evening, caller. Welcome to Talk Back with Gillian.
Good night, Gillian.
Good night.
Good night. Yes, a guy was on Sharma, right, Channel 6, about the same inquiry about the thing under the water, the cable. And the PPP damages. Some PPP, yes. They say that the PPP people.
Well, everything it is the PPP does these days.
Another thing, you are very intelligent. They can never come to the PPP. PPP are very bright people. You all are bright, and we will take this country back. I promise you, we will. Thank you.
Well, keep the faith alive. Good evening. Thanks for coming through. Well, everything it's the PPP. Whether the PPP was there or not, it is the PPP. On social media, I read where they're telling persons that, you know, the PPP is going to go around and instill fear in people, and it's part of the campaign. Even the case where you had the 3 bandits who went into the house in Norton Street, and they had the exchange of gunfire with police, during which they were killed, they were shot, and they died as a result of that. They're saying that it's the PPP who are sending the criminals out there to cause mayhem, so that, you know, the country can go into a state of emergency. No, you know, the PPP, we don't have time to do that. We have time to ensure that our country is on the right path and that developments take place. That is what we're looking forward to. We're not having time to go and have criminals to go there. Why would we want the criminals to go and harm people? That doesn't make any type of sense. Good evening and welcome to Talk Back with Gillian.
Yeah, good evening, madam.
Good evening.
Just like,
You need to speak up a bit, please. We're not getting you.
I would just like to talk a little about this fiasco at the GNL, the Guyana National Newspaper Limited. Now, it is all very, very sad when it is being reported in international community. This man committed 20 frauds. That's an auditor's report, but it is a fraud. Why they didn't bring in the police? That's one. And then there's about 4 other issues of receipts and making a trip, and up to today he hasn't given the report. These receipts. So how could you bring back this man? Apart from Nagumutu wanting to be the PM, I mean, he's an accessory to a crime, and all 4 people that are involved are liars. The Chan is a liar, Nagumutu is a liar, Duncan is a liar, and so we are finding this rather strange in Guyana, and the president, as the guy said just now, is just sitting and doing nothing. He himself is condoning lawlessness because he's part of the lawlessness. He's not upholding the Constitution himself. I find it very strange. At least he's sitting down and enjoying the good life at the expense of the people of Guyana. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming through. Thanks for your comments. Well, indeed, you know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, the transparency and the accountability and wanting to jail ex-PPP officials for corrupt transactions. But what is happening now? These persons, the evidence is there from the auditors and all of that, and nothing is being happened. They're sent off and then being reinstated. Good evening and welcome to Talk Back with Gillian.
Yes, good evening. Now, one of the major priorities to my mind for any government moving in the power, moving into official authority, would have been the removing of people that living in the slum areas, you know, people living in parking, like in East Penton, Fishwell, West, and those areas. I think those are the new top priority, not billions, big empty pavilion like what we got in the past, and billions, you know, you talk about posh areas to the elite. That was going to be one major priority, and then people will discover they're doing something. Now it's just putting up stands with light all around. Now, this is a priority, not to me, you know.
Well, Durban Park of itself that was built still have a lot of questions surrounding it. Those are one of the many scandals in which, you know, monies were utilized for this to build the Jubilee Park project, and to date, no accountability has been given. Persons are saying, contractors are saying that they're still owed sums of money.
My mind, if a track was built back there for incarceration, it would have on the country revenue, you know. It would have done better for the country, but to see empty vehicles spending like that, all that tells you that this government really don't know what they're really doing, you know?
Well, to them, they seemingly know what they're doing.
I'm finished.
Okay, thank you for coming through. Well, yes, it could have been used for something else, but I think it's a mindset with the coalition that, you know, once anything that was built by the PPP, they want to distance themselves away from it, you know, because it's a corrupt transaction. But today we're wondering where the corruption really lies. Good evening and welcome to Talk Back with
Good night,
Gillian.
Gillian.
Good night.
Since the PPP is going to win the next election, all those people that got fired could be reinstated, right? And maybe given all the money that it's 2 or 3 months before election, and they could be given all the back pay. The PPP will win. So have no fear.
Okay, so that is your contribution. Give them back all the money that is owed to them.
All the money that they didn't get because the lady fired them, and then they could deal with the lady in some other way, whatever other legal way that it could be done, right?
Yeah.
But we employ the people and pay them all the money that's left.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
Thank you very much.
Well, on that, in relation to what that caller said, you know, you wonder at times where some organizations that were very vocal during the tenure of the PPP, what has happened to them? You know, they got their muzzle me maneuver going on. They're not saying anything. And I wonder what the Public Service Ministry, Mr. Patrick Yard and his colleagues, his team, what they're going to say about that. Good evening and welcome to Talk Back with Gillian.
Hey, good night.
Good night.
Hey, I want to know, I'd like to know that they used to talking about the Marriott Hotel is a white elephant. And today, this government making the hardest use of the white elephant. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, indeed, the coalition, when in opposition, they said not only was a white elephant, I remember it was supposed to be turned into old people's home, where we still have a lot of homeless old people out there, and they did not transform it into an old people's home. It's a very flourishing hotel that we have there. I've attended many activities there, and it's up and going. Good evening and welcome to Talk Back with Gillian.
Hi, good evening, Gillian.
Good evening.
I want to ask you some questions. I ain't saying that this government is perfect in what they're doing. There's a lot of rumors going on, well, yes, a lot of things they're doing that is putting the people. But I want to ask a question in relationship to your all in power for the past 20-something years. We are do for poor people in this country. I want you to point out one single thing and tell me, tell the public what the PPP government has done for the poor people in this country. Because one of the things that I put to you that make you lose power is because the small man was suffering tremendously in this country. I know he's suffering the same way now, but I know he was suffering tremendously. And the killing of poor people, children, was going unturnable in this country. You don't have no reason for justifying anything. Once a man died and he come from a slum area, that was it. It's only now, young people get shot, you're hearing, oh, they're still killing people. But these people could identify the things they're doing. In the previous government, there were things that people didn't do and dying. I want you to tell me one thing we are doing for the poor people of this country. Just identify one
I will.
people. Thank you.
All right, thank you for coming through. Well, that caller wants to identify one thing. There's so many things that we can identify that the PPP did for the poor people of this country. One, there was a large-scale housing development program where many thousands of Guyanese, poor Guyanese, was able to purchase a house lot for less than $100,000. And there was an arrangement with the financing institutions where you could have gone and you had your land paid off for, and you were able to give an easy access to mortgages to build your homes. And everyone knows that a home, a shelter, is a very important thing. You can go without food for a day. You can go without clothes for a few months and just use what you have. But when it comes to shelter, as they say, when rain falls, when it rains and when night sets in, you need somewhere to put your head. And many Guyanese was able to do that. across Guyana, we see the opening up of a lot of housing schemes in Guyana, and that was the second time it was done by the PPP when they were in government. We have Diamond, which is the largest housing scheme in Guyana. We have Parfait Harmony. We have the Tushan housing scheme. That is just one of the things that the PPP government did for the 23 years they were in government. Make land and homes available and accessible at a very reasonable cost to Guyanese people. Today, this government is yet to do that. Then you had the grant that was given to the school children, where parents got $10,000 grant for every child from nursery to secondary, and they were given that grant to be able to help them. And I could tell you where I saw mothers who either were not working, they were unemployed, or they were at the minimum wages. They would sit and they could anticipate that they're going to get this money, and they were able to sit there and decide what they were going to purchase for their children, along with the school uniform vouchers. So it made sending a child to school a bit easier, as against buses. And you give a few bicycles to chosen persons, you know, your members and your friends in communities. And you give a boat here and there, you know. Not everybody's benefiting from that. But across Guyana, every child from nursery to secondary benefited. And it didn't have to do with how many children you had in your family. That was one of the other things that was done. And the government of this country wanted to do so much more. But we remember that the budgets and the big scissors that they touted in the then opposition, the now coalition government, of cutting the budgets of agencies. The hydropower project, Amelia Falls, that was supposed to come on stream. Today we would not have had this kind of fiasco with electricity. We would have had cheap renewable energy coming our way. What has happened to the specialty hospital that was supposed to be built? Today we would not have been wondering when our children get sick or they have these, you know, special illnesses to be taken care of. You have to come. I know about persons coming to the office of the leader of the opposition and begging to get help. They don't know where to go to. And when they go to the Ministry of Health and those places, they're being pushed around to get the finance to take a loved one out to get specialized treatment for whatever illness they might have. That hospital would have been up on stream. It would have served to help our sick people, and it would have also provided jobs. So when we're talking about businesses were open, loans were given to persons, the small businesses bureaus were open, and persons were able to go and get loans to open their own businesses and be self-employed. So when you're talking about the PPP administration not meeting the small man, that is so untrue, because you go back into the very areas today and you hear the cries and the pleas of the very people who the caller would have been earmarking as the small man, the grassroots people. The grassroots persons is suffering even more now, because those who were not at the grassroots level, they're suffering. Businesses are closing up. Big businesses are closing down. There is no spending power. The economy of the country has declined rapidly, and we see it in reports. Even the Bank of Guyana recently sent out a report. Everything is on a downward go. So when we want to be realistic, the PPP in 23 years in government of this country took Guyana out of the garbage bin and brought it to where it was up to 2015. We saw development. We had an end to all the massive blackouts that we were having for days, sometimes on end. You know, persons using flambeau, and they got to get candles, and you got to get up in the wee hours of the morning and go and line up in long lines to get water, to bathe and to use for your household chores, and the big fights that took place at the standpipes that were happening, you know, and people getting injured, not having access to food items. We remembered of the price control squad and the contraband squad, because people had to smuggle things in. I could remember sitting at my window as a young person and seeing lines from 12 o'clock outside a baker shop just to get a loaf of bread. And if when you were one that were lucky to get that loaf of bread, if you didn't hold it properly, you came out with your clothes torn and the bread in pieces. So when we want to talk about what the PPP did, that is so unrealistic. The PPP has done a lot for this country. It has aided its development. We were on a fast track and we were getting there. But we had an opposition who felt that because, again, this one-seat majority, that they could have done what they wanted. The onus was in their hands to do what they felt like doing. And so every year, whenever the budget came and it was read, they voted down the budget. They voted down the budget. And some agencies were given $1 and that kind of ridiculousness. Today, they're in the hot seat. And what have they done? We're hearing more cries and pleas of the people of the country. The people are crying out for help. They need a better life. Are they getting it? Are they getting that better life? They're not comfortable. So there's so many things that we can show. The road improvements that they have been there. The Berbice Bridge that has been built to accommodate persons not having to wait in long hours to get the ferry to come across from New Amsterdam to New Amsterdam and to come over to Rossignol. So much was done, and we have been able to build ourselves to a level of decency, and all that has been eroded away within the last 3 to 4 years under this coalition government. So the PPP has a track record. It's there for us to see. It's there for us to understand and analyze as against what this government has done for this country before and now under a new leadership. So we need to analyze where we were, where we are, and where we want to go. It's coming up here to program time on Talk Back with Gillian. And as usual, you know, as I quote, I close every evening, every Sunday evening, I close with an excerpt from Dr. Chedi Jagan, the founder of the People's Progressive Party. And this week's excerpt is from the 1960s, and it's the 4 cornerstones of our present needs: racial harmony, national unity, national independence, peace, and progress. The 4 cornerstones of our present needs are racial harmony, national unity, national independence, peace, and progress. Without racial harmony, there can be no national unity. And without racial unity, there can be no national independence. And without independence, there can be no progress. So those are the words from Dr. Chedi Jagan in the 1960s as he talked about the need for racial harmony, national unity, independence, peace, and progress. Only if they go together, then can we be able to progress. This is where I take my leave of you for this evening. I'm saying good night and have a blessed week. I'll see you next week again with another program of Talk Back with Gillian.